EA has a bad week as they announce a bunch of cancellations and delays. There were a number of live service games being shut down. Could E3 be missing the big E3 as Sony, Nintendo, and Xbox could be skipping the event? Welcome to another episode of Stay Tuned on Gaming for the Week, as I, your host, Damon Richards, goes through some of the biggest video games news stories of the week. If you enjoy this video, like, comment, and subscribe for further videos. Let's start this whole video with EA, as they had a pretty bad week. First off, they announced that they'll be shutting down Apex Legends Mobile. Yes, right, they'll be shutting it down as the game was launched all the way back in May 2022, but will now go offline on May 1st, 2023. This despite the game being very successful. Both Apple and Google recognized it as the 2022 mobile game of the year. It was downloaded 46 million times and was generating around 54 million in consumer spending. They also cancelled the development of another major mobile spin-off, Battlefield Mobile, shutting the internal studio down as well. Now, why did they do this? It wasn't because the game didn't have quality or that it was struggling to attract a large number of players, but mainly because the game was very, very different than its counterpart when it came to the console PC versions. They wanted the game to not compete against it, but instead feel like you're progressing in the game of one versus the other. Apex Mobile Legends was developed externally by Tencent's Lightspeed and Quantum. It ran its own seasons, had a slightly different roster compared to the console PC versions, and basically Battlefield Mobile was supposed to operate the same way. And because the game was so different, EA wanted to deliver a much more connected and cohesive experience than having two different separate experiences. And the thing is, because of the success of Genshin Impact showing that you can have a game both on a console and a mobile and have a connected experience, it showed that EA just wasn't doing that. This also comes on the approach of their competitors when it came to Call of Duty Mobile Warzone and Activision, basically doing the same thing with cross-progression connecting it to the console and the PC version of Call of Duty games. This is pretty much a thing that EA had been struggling with, and because they had to cancel it. They also announced that they'll be delaying Star Wars Jedi Survivor from March 17th to April 28th. Basically just to polish it a bit more. And yeah, it's been a pretty weird week for EA. I mean, this news comes literally out of nowhere. It shocked many people. But yeah, they really just wanted to create a much more cohesive experience when it came to making these games. And because of the last 2 years, they have stuffed with signs that the console players really wanted to move into a mobile market, but many of them have been very unsuccessful in doing so. And Ubisoft has been trying to do that with both Assassin's Creed and the Rainbow Six series. And because they haven't been able to connect these experiences on their counterparts, it has basically left them reeling in this. So to connect a much more experience, it doesn't mean that Apex Legends might not come back. They might still do an Apex Legends mobile, but when they can able to replicate the console PC version on a mobile device. And yeah, we'll see how this goes. Pretty bad week for EA as they announced all of these titles and just cancellations outright. But that is not where the cancellations stopped, because there was a bunch of cancellations announced during this week. And there's a lot to go through. Let's go through some of the cancellations that happened this week. First of all, the live service game Knockout City is closing down in June. The big game, which was a live service battle royale dodgeball game, will be launching on February 28th, Season 9 of Knockout City. It'll kick off basically the last ever update for this game, as all real money transactions will be removed from the game, and the update will last until the server shut down on June 6th. Valiant Studios, who are the developers behind the game and also developers behind Mario Kart Live Home Circuit, and took publishing duties over the game, made it free to play. They basically are planning to also release a standalone version for PC, so that players can host their own servers and continue to play the game even after the final update. They basically said they're an independent studio, they can't handle all the games, and they gotta shut it down. Another live service game is also being shut down, this time by Epic Games. The Battle Royale brawling game Rumbleverse is also shutting down at the end of February. Just after 6 months of launching, players will be able to get refunds for any purchases they make, and the game only launched last year, August, so that's pretty bad in terms of that. There was another cancellation when it came to Xbox shooter Crossfire, as it's being shut down, as well as its single player mode. Now, this was Smilegate and Remedy's shooter that they launched, I think, sometime last year, and it hasn't really done that much. So they'll be shutting down both the multiplayer and single player mode on May 18th. Sales have been halted for the game, and if you bought the game within the last 14 days, you'll be eligible for a refund. Now, it's going to be both the multiplayer service, which was made by Crossfire's internal team, and Remedy's single player, which was their single player thing for the campaign, will also be shut down. Now, Crossfire was released exclusively for the Xbox Series X and Xbox One on February 22nd, and now it's going to be shut down. They basically said that the reason they're ending support for the game is because it wasn't where it was meant to be, and they weren't going to work on it to fix it. Back 4 Blood developer also announced that it's going to be ending its development on that game. That's right, Turtle Rock Studios saying they're going to be focusing on their next game and will stop development for Back 4 Blood. Now, you can still play the game, but now they're focusing on just taking all of their effort into creating a brand new title instead of supporting the Back 4 Blood. Their last expansion, I think, was released on October 21st, and they received, no, the game, sorry, was launched on October 21st, and they received 3 expansions, with the last one coming in summer. So yeah, this has been a crazy week when it came to live service titles. I mean, Marvel Avengers got shut down a couple of weeks ago. So it just goes to show that the market has been oversaturated with these titles, but also it costs a lot of money and resources and time to keep these games running. And if you don't have a good foundation, a lot of these games just will never make it out of being more than a year. At minimum, a live service title will last you what? 5 years? Maybe 5 years, and that's if you're at least somewhat good. And if you are a developer that's making a live service title, you have to constantly update the game. But I also think because of the release of Genshin Impact, it's disrupted the whole live service genre. Like, everything has been disrupted because not only does Genshin Impact have a really good like single player and a good foundation, it just keeps adding things to it, from new characters, new locations, new missions. So many things keep adding to Genshin Impact, and because it's both on console and mobile, it just changes the game completely. And I think it's shown that right now, nobody really cares that much for live service games anymore, and not a lot of people are buying into it. And because they've oversaturated the market, nobody wants to really get anywhere or can get any success from these games. Let's talk about PlayStation's surge this week, as they announced a lot of figures and basically ending the PS5 drought that they have. Alright, so let's talk about it. They have sold 30 million PS5s were sold to customers from November 22nd launch all the way to December 22nd. That includes the 7.1 they had for the last 3 months of 2022. That's 3 million better than they had in the same quarter of the previous year. So this basically supports the claim that Sony has overcome the supply issues they've had for the console. Of course, they also announced it with this big trailer that was basically saying, hey, it's done. And of course, they've had some, I think, events in the UK, like these big PR events that's been happening around. But another big news is that God of War Ragnarok has sold 11 million copies in its first 75 days of release. That makes it the fastest Sony-made game to reach that mark. That's actually really, really good. They also announced that they had 112 million active users on the PSN network. This is, again, something really good for PlayStation. Some really good numbers are coming out here. And due to the console now probably going to be more readily available, this means that Sony is probably going to see even a higher rise when it comes to their games. Because not only is God of War Ragnarok a very big game, but Sony is also having a really big year this year, I think. They're going to, of course, need to get Spider-Man 2 out sometime this year, as Insomniac is also reporting to get Wolverine, which they're reportedly trying to get a R rating for, to release, I think, in late 2024, which is also really good. But also another thing they've also announced is that the PlayStation Plus collection, which I believe is on PS5 only, which gives you access to a bunch of PS4 games, will be closing on May 9th. Now, this is mainly just due to the fact that this collection is not needed anymore, because all of those games, when it comes to, about 98% of those games are available on their subscription service, the deluxe versions of their PS Plus tiers. So yeah, I think there's only 2 titles that are not available there, but they are available somewhere else. So they aren't really anything big that you're like, oh my gosh, I need to get that. There's also another report that Sony also may be working on another Uncharted. Naughty Dog has said that they are done with Uncharted, but Sony might not be. During the trailer that they released for the PS5, marking the end of its scarcity, there was a short little video clip that's in there that shows a female finding a treasure. Many people thinking it could be relating to Nathan Drake's daughter in the game. But hey, there's nothing on that. They haven't said anything on it as well. But of course, there's also more talk coming around for its PSVR, where a report came out saying that they have actually cut down its forecasted sales for the system. But that report became false, as Sony has said that they have not cut it and they're pretty excited for the game, for the console's release, which is later this month, I believe. Which is actually, I wouldn't have been surprised if they did, because the console is very expensive. Like, the VR system is very, very expensive. Almost as, in my country, it's almost as expensive as a PS5. It's like, I think like 500 Rand cheaper, which isn't a lot. But we'll see. They're the only company right now working on VR in the console market. So, hey, they could still really, they don't really have anything to compare. And if you want to bring up Meta, they also didn't really work that well. Meta's VR AR work has been very costly. The company's Reality Labs has lost 4.27 billion in the last quarter, bringing its total losses to almost 14 billion. The unit generated 2.15 billion in revenue last year, but that's been slightly down from 2.27 billion in 2021. So it shows that VR is still very hard to sell to customers. But again, Sony is the only one doing a console-ready VR system. No one else is. No one else is touching it. No one else wants to even try VR. They're the only one still doing it. So yeah, been a good week for Sony when it comes to the PlayStation 5 and its sales. Let's talk about the main topic, and that has all to do with E3. As E3 could be missing the big three, as Nintendo, PlayStation, and Xbox may not attend the event. Now, the event will finally return, I think after like 2 years, when in 2019, of course, it was cancelled due to you-know-what, and will finally be making its return. But it seems like none of the big three are going to attend this event. Now, Sony has cut ties for a long time with E3, with its last exhibition being there was 2018. And of course, they said they weren't going to go for 2019, and yeah, they've been doing their own thing with State of Play. Nintendo, who usually likes E3 itself, while they not attend the event to make anything when it comes to announcements, mostly doing it on a Nintendo Direct, they've been doing that for years, they usually have some show floor presence, but this year they have decided to skip it, and that will basically be due to them having very few major releases, with the only major release so far on their schedule being The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, which is coming out sometime in May. So they're not really having much else after that. I mean, there are titles coming out, but of course, that is the biggest title of the year. And since, the Nintendo Switch is winding down, they're not looking to really go out of their way to make big announcements. So they might not even have a show floor presence at all. On the Xbox side, well, they actually have quite a lot to talk about. Starfield and Forza Motorsport, which seems to be releasing at the end of the year, second half of the year instead of being the beginning half of the year. But they also have already committed to airing an Xbox showcase, which is coinciding with E3's dates in June. So they also may not have a booth there, and this could also be to them doing a cost cutting, as they did after a large round of layoffs were happening in the company, and they also cut their marketing budget. And of course, there have been disappointing financial results for many of their titles, especially Halo Infinite being one of them. Now, this might be that everybody saw this coming, because E3 hasn't been what it has been for a very long time. And I mean, it's quite a shame, because the event is where most of the craziest news has happened at E3. Like console announcements, console reveals, video game reveals, so many different things have been announced during that time. Now, Sony getting out of there is something that has happened for quite some time. They cut ties with E3. They didn't like how the ESA was working, so they cut ties. I understand why they cut ties, and I understand why Nintendo and even why Microsoft would want to cut ties. It just costs so much money to be at E3. You spend a lot of money to be at E3, to make these events, to show off all these things, and you don't really have to anymore. And the State of Play and Nintendo Direct and what Xbox has been doing has been very successful. Not to mention, they get to control the flow of the dialogue, announce what they want to announce, and announce what they needed to announce at the right time. They get to show off what they want, when they want, and they don't have to spend any money really doing it. I mean, does it really cost them that much money to get a State of Play, which is just a bunch of trailers and maybe a gameplay video, which they could just have one of their developers just make on the fly? So yeah, this has been happening for a long time, and I do think it's going to be sad when it does happen, because one of the good things about E3 is that a lot of the indie developers can meet a lot of the big publishers. And of course, they could also work with a lot of the other one of the big three and have their games shown on the showcase larger and bigger than ever before. I mean, Devolver Digital did that for a very long time before having their own event. And many of Square's games and Ubisoft's games were shown off there. And those were the games where they got the most traction and the most eyes looked at. And just trying to get a game to sell nowadays is really, really tough. So that is a bit of the shame. This year, I believe they are doing something different with E3. Not all of the event is going to be open to consumers. I believe the first 2 days is going to be basically just business and investors and all of that type of stuff, business and media. The third day is going to be more media and more business stuff and publisher stuff. And I only know the last day is going to be consumer only, like only consumers can show up. And so, yeah, it's going to be a bit of a shame. I do think E3 got a bit out of hand. I mean, EA, Ubisoft, Square even showed up at one point. Bethesda showed up. There were so many events happening at one time during E3. And because of that, a lot of the news can get very much suffocated. You know, you're trying to make this announcement for this game, which you think you're very excited about. And it was basically drowned out by so much of the noise. Now, Sony could be doing something and Nintendo could be doing something either within the week of E3 or before the week. Maybe making something like State of Play just before the week of that. Because the timing of E3 is still really good. It's the middle of the year and it's a good time to show off your investors and consumers what's happening for the rest of the year and what's happening at the beginning of the year. Because that's usually what E3 is. What's happening at the end of the year for the rest of the year and what's going to be happening all the way until the next year, June. But again, nowadays, it's much cheaper just to make a video than it is to go all the way, make an event, and then go and just decide, hey, let's make it a whole booth and then waste all this money when we don't really need to do that anymore. I do think that Sony will still show up for the Tokyo Game Show, and they might still do PAX as well, but E3, I don't think they really need to anymore. I think it's a very old tradition now to do it, which is a shame because I think E3 is still the largest number of eyes on any game at that time. But they've always been losing exhibitors for a very long time now, and many people just don't like how the ESA work, and especially the management of the ESA. So, while ReedPop has taken over, people still don't want to work with them. Especially, I think they had a lot of scandals as well. Especially that 2019 leak of attendees' personal details was not good whatsoever. And there isn't really much to announce now. I mean, if Sony is going to announce a new console, they would rather create an entire own event, like PSX. You know, even though PSX isn't around anymore, they could just make a PSX and be like, we're going to make our console announcement there. They control it, fill it with just PlayStation fans. Yeah. And it's not to mention that there are many events. I mean, Xbox has its own event that it does sometimes. EA had its own event and they do their own stuff. I believe Ubisoft does some stuff as well. But yeah, many of these games don't even need to be there anymore. It's a bit of a shame. I still remember waking up, watching, because, you know, time zone differences, and waiting to see the announcements of what Sony or Microsoft and back in the day, what Nintendo would do. There was always some excitement with E3, and I think it's kind of lost that excitement, especially when Square and Ubisoft and Bethesda all jumped on to make their own like showcases. So what were your greatest moments with E3? You know, what are the things you remember doing to prepare for E3, or just, you know, get up and early and watching it and just wanting to see what they announce? I still remember the craziness that happened with Sony's E3 when they like changed the game and said, no more talking, let's just do trailers, or some of the biggest titles of the year, especially like the re-announcement of the Final Fantasy VII Remake, The Last Guardian. Like some of those titles we couldn't believe was getting announced. Like it will forever be in infamy. And it's a shame it's gone. It's a shame, E3 is not gone, but it's a shame most of that is going to be away. But ReedPop still hopes that the event will be a success. I just don't know how much of a success it will be. They're also facing some more competition from Jeff Keighley's Summer Game Fest, which will be holding its first-person event this year after it's been doing successful like digital events. It'll be doing for its first time a first-person event, which I believe is happening I think it's happening a week before E3 or a couple of days before E3. So there's some more competition there. And I believe more games will be shown there than they would be shown at E3. Since, again, if it's going to be open up to a lot of business stuff, I don't think a lot of companies are really planning on making a big booth whatsoever. So again, what are your fondest memories of E3? Tell me down below. Let's talk about what's happening for the rest of the week of gaming, and there really isn't much this week when it comes to video games. But there are some interesting stuff happening with some earning reports happening throughout this week. Activision and Take-Two on Monday, February 6th will report quarterly earnings. Steam Next Fest begins, which offers hundreds of free PC games throughout. Tuesday, February 7th, Nintendo reports quarterly earnings, but Hogwarts Legacy will be releasing for those who bought the deluxe edition. But if you only bought the regularly priced edition, you will get the game on Friday, February 10th. The Division 2 will also begin its Season 11 on Tuesday as well. Wednesday, nothing is happening, but Thursday, Rogo and Sega will report quarterly earnings. And Friday, February 10th, Remedy will also report its quarterly earnings as well. There were also a bunch of new games announced. We had the February slated mobile RPG Street Fighter Duel, and the Crew Motorfest, a multi-platform racing game sequel from Ubisoft that is set in Hawaii. And yeah, that'll be coming out sometime apparently later this year. One of the few Ubisoft games coming out this year. And that's it for this week on Stay Tuned on Gaming. If you liked the video, comment, like, and subscribe. It really helps the channel out. I'm still growing at a very small pace. And what other videos do you want me to cover when it comes to gaming? Thank you. What's up? Goodbye. See ya.
Know where it leads. I'm afraid you're on your own. I've ensured that we have a moment to ourselves.
Let's even her odds, shall we?
We leave our legacy in your hands.